think most people have grown used to it just being signing day is dramatic. There's the traditional bag man, or NIL in this case, where it's a legalized bag man, essentially shows up and all of a sudden somebody's going to a university that you didn't think they had any interest in as of a day or two previously. And that happens all the time. And that's why it was so, I guess, surprising and calm in a good way that Notre Dame, I mean, by 9 o'clock yesterday morning, they had all 23 of their NIL or their actual national letters of intent signed, delivered, and it was drama free. It wasn't even like there was one that they were waiting on at noon or something. It was the public relations team sent out their information late in the morning, and it's like, okay, well, I'm used to like Peyton Bowen last year, 5-star safety that was committed to Notre Dame all year, went to Oregon on signing day, then all of a sudden went to Oklahoma, then said he's going to go to Oregon, then went back to Oklahoma. And it's like, I was waiting for something. And it was just like, all right, I'll gladly take this. I don't know if the web hits are going to be there necessarily without the drama, but in terms of building a football program and one that can compete to be in the college football playoff with regularity here as it expands to 12 teams starting next year, I think things went in a very good and very smooth fashion for Marcus Freeman and company.
So with 23, that's a little much to try to go through each particular player, but kind of hit the highlights for us in regards to maybe not necessarily the top of the board, but some of those guys that stand out to you in regards to who could make an impact this fall or who may surprise.
Yeah, I think that, I mean, it kind of starts with when Notre Dame landed a quarterback very early in this class this time around. And CJ Carr, if you followed anything with it at all, he's the grandson of Lloyd Carr, Michigan legendary head football coach that won half the national championship in 1997. But it's kind of funny because he had another grandfather that had Michigan ties. His dad was a backup quarterback at Michigan. And so the thought was kind of like, okay, well, with that last name, with that pedigree, it's just a matter of time until he's wearing the winged helmet and the maize and blue. And he was one of Notre Dame's first commits in this class. And he comes in not just with a big name and a big legacy in terms of having college football history connections, but also with big-time talent. He's top 5 quarterback, 5th ranked on the 24/7 Sports composite ratings. And just seeing him as an early enrollee. I mean, there's early enrollees, then there's these super early enrollees. And that's kind of what he is. Graduated high school early, already enrolled. So he's actually participating in the bowl practices leading up to the Sun Bowl. Not that he's going to get any snaps in that or get any playing time in that. But just to see him and see 18-year-old kid walk in and some of the things that you can't necessarily teach of like this incredibly quick release. And there's a long way to go before he ever takes a collegiate snap in a game and that part of it. But there is certainly excitement that comes along with that. And it kind of starts with having one of these elite quarterbacks, even with getting last year in the transfer portal and Sam Hartman, good quarterback. I don't think anybody's going to confuse Sam Hartman with being an elite quarterback that's going to be drafted in the 1st or 2nd rounds in this. As you pulled up the list there a little bit, Cam Williams is a player that a lot of people are excited about. I think Rivals had him as a 5-star. And with that, he became the first 5-star receiver that Notre Dame was actually able to successfully recruit and get signed to a national letter of intent since Michael Floyd all the way back in 2008. So expectations are extremely high for him, 6'2", 190. The thing to know about him is just speed, speed, speed. That's something that Notre Dame's been lacking quite a bit. Kingston Vaiamu Asa from California, very highly coveted linebacker. Ohio State was one of his finalists as well. USC was in the running for him. And just from all indications, I mean, the comparisons are kind of there. Not to say that he's going to be as legendary in terms of what he produced as a player, but the comparisons are there of him as a person, him as a leader with Manti Te'o. And obviously, it's a long bridge to cross in order before you start to actually compare them as players. But in terms of leadership, in terms of what they're able to bring to the play, as they're kind of seen as recruits, there's some comparisons there. And then another name that you have up there on the screen, Bryce Young, defensive lineman from Charlotte Christian there in Charlotte, North Carolina. Maybe that last name is familiar because this has got to be the only class in college football this year that has 2 recruits in it that are sons of NFL Hall of Famers. Brian Urlacher's son, Kennedy Urlacher, a safety / linebacker in this class as well. So just kind of an interesting nugget there to kind of look at with this. But I think the thing that sticks out mostly to this It's a complete class. It's a class that you look at positionally, depth at running back, depth at receiver, depths on both sides of the line, which are very important, depths in the secondary. And then also with it, it was one that, kind of like we touched on earlier, it wasn't a class that Notre Dame was trying to put together or put the finishing touches on for the last couple of weeks. It was one that they pretty much had. I don't know if you can ever call a class a recruiting class in the bag anymore with the way just college football kind of works, because you have to recruit your own guys just to stay on the roster, let alone the guys to actually sign on signing day. But it was seemingly a pretty gone forward conclusion. This is going to be what Notre Dame brought in, and it's kind of what speaks to what Marcus Freeman said a bit yesterday as well.
Nick Shepkowski joining us to break down Notre Dame's National Signing Day class and everything connected, meaning the transfer portal. You can catch Nick's work at Irish Wire. You see the Twitter handle /X right there for both Nick and Irish Wire and Notre Dame with the top 10 class. Please, if you enjoy the content, please like the video and subscribe right here at the Voice of College Football. Nick, you know better than I do that one of the knocks against Notre Dame football in recent years, whether that was the Brian Kelly regime, obviously most of that, but even trickling into Marcus Freeman's 2 years, has been, okay, where's the game changer? Where's the guy that can take the top off the defense? They certainly there at Notre Dame have produced the tight end position, of course, but even at wide receiver, some viable wide receivers in the NFL in the last 5 to 10 years. But who's that guy? Well, Chris Tyree was projected to be that guy. He has fled in the transfer portal. Does this class or anyone who's a target in the transfer portal been, possibly the next candidate to fill that role?
Yeah, I don't know. I always think you get in trouble when you look at incoming freshmen or true freshmen especially and try to put too high of expectations on them. Now, I say that, and I don't want to say that this player is going to be Raghib, the Rocket Ismail for Notre Dame. But the last time Notre Dame won a national championship, he was an incoming freshman on that squad. And he was an absolute burner, take the top off of a defense. And now college football has changed. Football as a whole has changed, of throwing the ball downfield and how offenses have run since then. And Notre Dame's not lining up with the old Lou Holtz offenses full of backfields full of fullbacks and lead blockers quite like the same anymore. But Cam Williams is that guy that the speed is just supposed to be. Will Fuller was kind of that guy for Notre Dame, 2014, 2015, where he would take the top off of a defense. And many times Notre Dame would be in a crunch late, and it would be Will Fuller that there just simply wasn't enough speed on an opposing secondary to cover him. And Cam Williams is probably that guy for Notre Dame. Now, I don't think it's fair necessarily to just say, okay, you've been playing against 6A talent in the state of Illinois, go to the University of Notre Dame and go and do this against Florida State next year, go and do this against USC next year, go and do this against Texas A&M next year and succeed and do great at it right away. But I think that it is going to be – Notre Dame hasn't given a ton of playing time necessarily to wide receivers for most of the Brian Kelly era. This past year, now a few of these players did transfer, enter the transfer portal, but Jaden Greathouse, 4 touchdown receptions. Rico Flores has gone into the transfer portal, but he became Notre Dame's first actual wide receiver with a 100-yard receiving game since Marcus Freeman's first game in the Fiesta Bowl. He did that this past year against Wake Forest on Senior Day. And so it is a position where Notre Dame is trying to get younger, and this class speaks to that a bit. They've also added talent to it through the transfer portal. And so it's one where, yes, there were losses. There's a change at the wide receiver coach position. Chancey Stuckney, the old Clemson wide receiver, is out. And so long to him. But it will be interesting to kind of see how Notre Dame does this now, because so many of their wide receivers they're not going to take that top off the defense. They're going to almost look like tight ends playing wide receiver, because they're these wide bodies, these big bodies that can create separation just based on strength, but not separation based on running by somebody. And so that should change with what this group of wide receivers should be entering 2024.
Nick, you mentioned the entry of Sam Hartman that gained a whole lot of attention that this time last year. He put up prolific numbers at Wake Forest. He found himself in a different style offense at Notre Dame. I would say that his season was a standard good season, and obviously because less was expected of him, because it's a run-oriented offense with a stronger offensive line and running backs, that the numbers weren't going to be there. We should have all known that going into the season, but he led a 9-3 football team. And so neither was a rousing success nor a failure by any stretch. And now we've got Riley Leonard. And so this is much heralded in regards to what's Riley Leonard going to be. He's a different quarterback than Sam Hartman, much more mobile, going to break contain, going to threaten the defense on the move. Do you like this fit and this acquisition of Riley Leonard?
Yeah, I think if that's the thing that Hartman kind of lacked last year, in that Hartman was, I think that's a fair evaluation, what you said. I think it's a good year. I don't think it's going to be confused with a great year or a legendary year by Notre Dame standards, by any stretch of the imagination. I think a lot of what Hartman kind of came with was, you saw his career totals and where he was statistically speaking, historically, on some of those charts. And part of that's because he had the extra year with COVID. And you saw like, wow, this is one of the most prolific passers. And it's in NCAA history. And it's more of a, well, he's kind of a compiler, not necessarily a game breaker week in and week out. And that's not necessarily a knock on him. It's just kind of the guy that he is. And so changing to the new offense, there were some hiccups along the way. Obviously, when you look at Notre Dame's offense this year, game is against Clemson, Louisville, and against Ohio State. It wasn't there for. It didn't produce the way that you see these truly elite offenses do. Now, when they're playing Tennessee State, when they're playing Navy, when they're playing some of the likes of the ACC, whether it's Wake Forest or Pitt, you're seeing 40 points, 50 points put up with relative ease. But when the big dogs come to town, when you're lining up against the more talented teams, the better teams, this offense wasn't anywhere to be found. And I think Riley Leonard is his ability to move the ball on his feet. So an element that Hartman doesn't bring, it just adds one more thing for the defense to have to be able to contain. So, okay, well, drop another guy in coverage because you know that Hartman's not going to scramble, or if he does, he's not going to break away from a whole heck of a lot. Well, Leonard's going to do that. So it makes him more of kind of that dual threat quarterback. And he's not, I don't think he's as good of a passer necessarily as Hartman is, but I think that he's a significantly better runner. I think the difference in him as a runner versus Hartman is greater than the difference in Hartman to him as a passer. And I think that helps Notre Dame overall. And I also think that it helps Notre Dame overall that I think he's going to have a better group of wide receivers, an extremely strong running back room. Offensive line will be a question with two tackles going to the NFL draft this coming year.
Chris Mitchell, highly productive at Florida International, and also played well and put up numbers against Power 5 opponents when he had those opportunities. Bo Collins was a guy that was a highly sought-after recruit, made some plays at Clemson, was a bit spotty, didn't fall in line with that Clemson wide receiver tradition we've seen over the last 10 years. So maybe he didn't meet expectations, but still a productive player in spots. I highlight those two guys, but what is your overall look at the transfer portal additions overall at this point?
Yeah, I think that there are significant losses. Touched on that just a little bit earlier. I think there's a lot that you replace in freshmen that were getting valuable playing time, good amount of playing time. But I do think that when you look at it at the end of the day, that you're going to go into 2024 with more talent on paper than you did 2023. Now, does that necessarily mean that the production is going to be better? Well, there's a lot of factors in play there. A new quarterback looking into a new system. There's a new offensive coordinator coming in, yet to be named. The search is out on that. But so it remains to be seen what exactly is going to happen there. But I think just in terms of on paper of you know what you're getting a little bit in some of the transfers that have come in. You have a solid incoming freshman group here. You have Jaden Greathouse, Jaden Thomas, both returning from this past season as well. So I think that there's a higher base of where things are starting from this past year with the potential to have I don't want to say like this great leaps in terms of a higher ceiling, but I think that there's a steady step forward that can be taken for the receiving group this coming year.
Nick Shipkowski joining us from Irish Wire, and we're going to take it down the path that you just mentioned in regards to an offensive coordinator. So I typically set these up two ways. There's the wish list, whether that be from the fan base, and I'm talking about the reasonable wish list, or yourself, versus do you have any lean on what the direction probably is going to be or who the likely candidates are?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. It's kind of the $1 million question around South Bend right now of who's it going to be. If I had my pick, if I had my choice of who it would be, I would look to the University of Missouri and none other than their own offensive coordinator, very strong candidate, I think, in Kirby Moore. He only had 1 year at Missouri so far, but obviously you saw what that team did in their turnaround this past year. And it's Kellen Moore's brother with the NFL ties to the Cowboys and the Chargers, and then played for the Lions as well with the Boise State connection. But then Kirby Moore just signed an extension with Missouri. Probably got a nice, handsome raise there as well. I think another one that makes sense that comes to mind is Mike Denbrock, former Notre Dame offensive coordinator. Has had actually 2 stints with Notre Dame, one under Tyrone Willingham, one under Brian Kelly. Just helped LSU to their prolific season, offensively at least. And you would think that he's at least somebody that's going to get a call and will take a call. Maybe he's not interested in going back to Notre Dame for a third time, but I'm sure that he would like to use Notre Dame, if nothing else, for a bit of leverage. So I think you can have some conversations there, get some evaluation on your offense that way. One that a lot of people like is Kevin Johns, the Duke offensive coordinator. And I don't know if I necessarily go after him because it's, oh, well, he was the offensive coordinator when Riley Leonard had his couple of big years at Duke. I think that helps, but I don't think you can necessarily build your offense off of that. I think it's one to definitely keep an eye on, though, because it doesn't seem like he's going to be following Mike Elko to Texas A&M. One I'll give you that would be a lot of fun and bring back a lot of memories and some laughs probably to a lot of college football fans, and it'll make you and I both feel probably a little bit older than we'd like to, but the name Charlie Weis, and I don't mean Charlie Weis Sr., but Charlie Weis Jr., the offensive coordinator at Ole Miss. I think there's this perception that when you hear a Lane Kiffin offense, you think back to, well, he likes to chuck the ball down the field. He likes to throw it all over and do this. But while at Mississippi, well, they've had their best success, and Weis has been there now for the last couple of seasons. That is a run-at-you offense. When they're ticking, they are running the ball and running the ball especially well. And there just happens to be a university in South Bend where that's what the traditions are built and prided on. And I think that offense would be very much a fit in the style. But those are just a few names to keep an eye on. I think that there's a lot of wild cards out there, and you could give me those 4 names and I could give you the field, and I wouldn't feel comfortable in me winning that bet of who will ultimately be hired.
Yeah, I seem to run into that narrative all the time, Nick, as well, with college football fans that just assume, okay, we've got an outdated offense because we run the ball too much and we're not scoring enough, and you've got to throw the ball all the time to have an updated offense. And look at Lane Kiffin, he's one of the best in the business. Well, Lane Kiffin is putting out a top 3 rushing offense in the SEC every year that he's been there. You look back a year, and Ohio State and Tennessee had 2 of the most prolific offenses in America, top 2 and 3 in terms of efficiency, points, yardage, and they're throwing the ball like the 60th or 65th number of times in the country. So it's about explosiveness, it's about efficiency, it's about balance, and all those things put together, not just throwing the ball 45 times. It's just not a cure-all for making your offense explosive automatically.
Well, and you know as well as anyone, being in the Midwest, like, okay, that's great in September. What happens late October, November when the gales start calling and you're 30, 35 mile an hour winds where it's physically impossible to throw the ball like you would like to throw the ball in outdoors? It's not like we're in the NFL and playing in domes in half the stadiums. I mean, you're playing outdoor football for the home games. Sure, Notre Dame plays a schedule that's national, and you go to some warm cities of LA or Stanford and that, but you play a lot of games in the elements, and those elements are not easy to deal with once November comes around.
Nick, are there any NFL draft decisions that you're still waiting on?
Not really. Pretty much all of those have been made. Joe Alt's the name that's going to be called first from Notre Dame this year, the left tackle. Enters the draft after just 3 years at Notre Dame. Not bad. Probably be a projected top 10 pick by most outlets. Would be surprised if his name's not called there. Not bad for a guy that was recruited and originally played tight end in his Notre Dame debut to be probably a top 10 pick there. He's the son of a former couple-time Pro Bowler for the Kansas City Chiefs, so he's got that. I think he grew up around knowing what it takes to kind of be great and the work you have to put in to be a successful football player at all levels. And so it's not going to be a surprise when he's probably in the top 10, if not challenging for a top 5 draft pick this coming year. Audric Estime, and the running back that the nation knows pretty much everything about. Just the guy that, my goodness, when you talk about looking the part of just a scary, monstrative running back, he is certainly that. I think he's deceivingly fast because you see him and you're like, that guy is a monster. He's huge. He looks like the Hulk, but he can run away from people too. Hurdles guy is very athletic, much more athletic than maybe his size or shape necessarily lends you towards thinking he necessarily is. I was surprised a little bit. Blake Fisher, the junior right tackle from Notre Dame, good career. First game of his career, he started at left tackle for Notre Dame in 2021 as a true freshman. Only became the second player in program history to do that in a season opener as a true freshman. Unfortunately for him, he tore his meniscus against Florida State in a game that Notre Dame won in overtime. Didn't play again until the bowl game that year. Alt's development, his incredibly fast development, unseated Fisher at left tackle then going into last season. And then Alt was just out of the gate great. So Fisher never earned it back to get to that left side again. And I really thought that it would be in his best interest to, if he could show that he could play left tackle, not just right tackle, that he could go from being a 3rd or 4th round pick that he'll probably be somewhere in there this year to, well, if you show that you can do that on the left side, or you can show that you can do that on both sides, that money of being the difference of being a 2nd or late 1st round pick is great when you come to NFL standards. So I was a little bit surprised by that decision. But yeah, those were really the kind of the main ones that you were looking at, and not necessarily a whole lot of a surprise. The one that I guess you technically are waiting on is Xavier Watts. Hasn't said that he's not coming back, hasn't said that he is coming back, but all signs kind of indicate that the Nagurski winner from this past year, the safety, will be returned, seeing as he's playing in the bowl game and says he can't get enough of college football. So maybe that decision hasn't ultimately been made yet, but for playing in the Sun Bowl when it seems like every other day someone else is opting out of it, for him to say that he's so strongly interested and wants to play in that game kind of lends me to think that he'll be returning for his final year of eligibility next year.
Nick, I got to think for Notre Dame fans, putting the names Oregon State and bowl game in the same sentence, for Notre Dame fans at a certain age, it doesn't bring back the best of memories. Of course, the Fiesta Bowl from over 20 years ago.
Yeah, God, you're making me feel old, Mark.
So I'm sorry.
Chad Johnson was in college tearing up Notre Dame back then. Chad Johnson is retired for a number of years now. He's changed his name how many times to Chad Ochocinco. I mean, TJ Hushmanzada was on that team.
Yeah.
Ken Simonton was the running back on Oregon State. Yeah, that was a destruction of epic proportions in that 2000 Fiesta Bowl. Oof.
It was. And, bowl games aren't what they used to be. But at the same time, Marcus Freeman's first dive into bowl play was a successful one in a really fun matchup against South Carolina, a very entertaining Gator Bowl game.
Well, actually, I mean, he did coach the Fiesta Bowl in his first game.
That's right.
It was a good first half. And
that's right. Yes, a big lead was blown in that one against Oklahoma State. So I got to think that nobody's too amped up for this one, but still, I'm a college football nerd. And you put 2 Power 5 programs on the same field that rarely play each other, if ever. And I'm a sucker for it. So what are you looking to get out of this Notre Dame Oregon State matchup at the Sun Bowl?
I think you have to take advantage of it being, you used to hear so much about, well, get to that bowl game because then you get 15 more practices for next year. And I think that's so true now because you see the opt-outs. And I'm with you. I don't know, I grew up with bowl season being so great of, hey, these teams never play each other. This is going to be fun. Or you have bowl memories or memories of matchups and you say, all right, well, hey, they're meeting again. This will be great. I can't wait to watch the Holiday Bowl or whatever the heck it might be, the Alamo Bowl, whatever it may be. And it might not be the same, but I guess like some of the interesting storylines for this are Marcus Freeman. I don't know if behind closed doors he's the same way, but every time there's a microphone in front of his face, don't try telling him that this game doesn't matter. Don't try telling him that this is an exhibition or anything along the lines. This is a chance for Notre Dame to get to 10 wins on the year. This is a chance for those who are around next year to lay the foundation for what should be a a successful season and a season that the expectation is going to be to make the college football playoff and host a home game in one of those tournament games next year. Like he is saying all the things of like, this is essentially game one of 2024 that has the opportunity to put a nice cap on the 2023 season. So don't expect this to just be show up, be happy to be there type of thing. Playing to win and set the foundation for something special next year is kind of at least the way he has worded things so far of how they're going to try to attack this. And it was interesting to me of, I don't know, you've talked about it before. Plenty of people have talked about it before of like, what does Notre Dame mean? It's not like the Lou Holtz era. It's going to be hard to ever have Notre Dame be that again, where the NBC contract comes out. Just the way college football and the TV structure and everything around it now is, if you want to watch Penn State any Saturday, you can. If you want to watch Florida State any Saturday, you can, because of how advanced TV is, and you can stream games, you can do whatever you need to do. So the NBC contract isn't quite the same. Like maybe the hype isn't there the same that it was under Lou Holtz, and maybe that might not ever return. But when Notre Dame was announced to go to the Sun Bowl, it was interesting for me to see some of the Sun Bowl representatives, some of those that work with the bowl game down in El Paso, of the pure excitement of, well, we didn't even have a Notre Dame helmet because we didn't think this was a possibility for us to land. But this game is going to sell out in a day. This is going to be huge for El Paso because of the bodies that are going to come just to see Notre Dame. And so that was sometimes you get too close to it and you kind of forget of how special something can be. And there's those teams that come to South Bend where, okay, yeah, you get your MAC schools a time or two a year. You get some of your Big Ten schools that are regulars, but then you get the ones of one Oklahoma or Texas or some of the blue bloods that there isn't an annual or regular rivalry with. And they come and you're like, wow, this is a bigger than big deal, because like Notre Dame and Ohio State this year, like, wow, Ohio State's in town. This never happens. It's neat to see that from a different angle in terms of like, wow, Notre Dame is coming to this town and what it means and the impact that it's going to have on this game being sold out versus to be having a stadium that's half full. That was kind of interesting and fun to see as well, because you lose sight of that a little bit, and you lose sight of some of what the impact and how much that can these bowl games in some of these cities as well.
And even postseason tradition that precedes us by decades, CBS and the Sun Bowl. It's the only CBS bowl game left, and they've held on to that property, and the Sun Bowl has been broadcast, and you'll have Gary Danielson and Brad Nessler doing the game, and that's what they've done for a zillion years. It used to be Vern Lundquist, but it's a CBS tradition to hang on to that Sun Bowl game, and even though ESPN's grabbed up everything else, basically, and there you go. So it takes us back to a bit of yesteryear there.
Yeah, a little bit. It's surprising to me, like when you look up the history of the Sun Bowl, outside of the Rose Bowl, it's the second oldest bowl game in all of college football. And so, yeah, I was always a sucker for Vern. Vern was, I was like Christmas week. It's like, just, I don't know, hearing Vern call a football game or hearing him Army Navy the second weekend of December, something was always just right about that. And Brad Nessler's not a bad consolation prize. That gets pretty close to Vern, but I don't know if anybody touches Vern territory and just of that comfort of a college football fan. But yeah, it's definitely, I don't know, maybe it's nostalgic. Maybe it's just me being a college football nerd of, all right, Notre Dame's playing a bowl game. It might not be the biggest bowl game in the world. It might not even feature a whole lot of guys that made the 2023 season, made an impact on the 2023 season, but it's the last one of these things we get until late next August. So treasure it, enjoy the 3 hours, 3.5 hours of it, because the second it goes away, you know as well as anyone, it's a long time from January until late August once the ball goes in the air again.
Longest off season in sports. There you go. Nick Shepkowski, Irish Wire. Head on over there, check out Nick's work, all the personnel situation scenarios that we just discussed. He takes a deeper dive there and so many other odds and ends there regarding Notre Dame football. Nick, we appreciate you breaking things down for us.
Absolutely, Mark. Anytime. Appreciate you making time.